This is the Fertile Mindset podcast, where we explore all the emotional aspects of fertility to support you on your path to parenthood. My name is Sarah Holland. I'm the Fertile Mindset coach and a mother to 2 children after my own fertility challenges. I hope you find all the support and inspiration you need within this podcast to carry you forward on your fertility journey towards your own successful outcome. It's also my wish that through listening to these episodes, you rediscover how to enjoy life now and live it to the full while you wait for your baby. Now, let's begin today's episode. Hello and welcome back to the Fertile Mindset podcast. I can't tell you how lovely it is to be back, and it's been wonderful to see so many people join us for our first episode in this series. Now I have another conversation to share with you that I found fascinating. I'd spoken to Maria before on her amazing podcast, When Miracles Happen, and we had such a great conversation that it planted the seeds in my imagination for this podcast to be created. And here we are, on to our 74th episode now, and welcoming Dr Maria Rothenburger, who is a fertility counsellor, coach, best-selling author, and intuitive. In this episode, you're going to hear both about her own path to parenthood and the journey this took her on, both in her own life and in the way she supports others in her work. I really love the perspective that Maria brought to the more spiritual and you could say woo-woo side of fertility from her science-based background and training, and I hope you love listening in too. Maria will also be joining us in my private membership group, the Fertile Mindset Sanctuary, to continue this interesting conversation. So if you are already a member, do look out for your invite to the live chat with Maria soon. And if you're not yet a member of the Sanctuary, do come over and join us. It's the best value fertility support membership available and gives you so much emotional support as well as access to exclusive members-only events like this chat with Maria. Go to fertilemindset.com/sanctuary to join us. Now, before we begin, I want to let you know that there is talk about suicidal thoughts in this episode. Please take care of yourself and choose not to listen if you would find this triggering. Hello, Maria. Welcome to my podcast. Lovely to have you here. How are you today?
I'm so well. Thanks, Sarah, again for having me. This is so much fun. It's been forever.
It really has. Yeah. I think we were saying about 3 years ago,
Something like
years
that.
ago
It's
that you got in
definitely
touch.
pre-COVID. Yeah.
Yeah. And you invited me to your amazing podcast, which
Yes.
was one of the many steps of kind of inspiration I had into creating this podcast, which took a long time. But yeah, it's been really lovely to have that conversation with you and imagine myself being the podcast host. And here I am inviting you back. So
You are. Don't you love it?
Wonderful. And yeah, I'm going to be really interested to talk to you about your work and about perhaps the different direction that it's gone in more recently and how you're supporting people on their fertility journeys. So yeah, before we get into all that stuff, did you want to just tell us a little bit about yourself and how you came to be here working in the world of fertility?
Sure. Well, as a lot of folks, and not everybody, but a lot of folks, I have my own fertility journey. My husband and I tried to conceive for 6.5 years, and various. I tend to go, like quote unquote natural route. So I did a lot of Chinese medicine, acupuncture, and herbs, and these kinds of things. A lot of movement, like yoga. And when that didn't work, we went into the Western stuff in combination with other things, IVF, IUI, all the pretty acronyms, or not so pretty.
Yeah.
And still, $45,000 later, I'm in the US, obviously,
Wow.
and no baby. And so I had an awakening of sorts. I began to um, break open. Really, I was quite distraught. I was quite depressed. I was even suicidal. I'm a mental health therapist, and so that was distressing to me. This is the interesting part. It was distressing to me that it wasn't distressing to me. I would actually just be driving to work thinking about suicide. And I was just curious about it as opposed to really upset about it. And so that's when I realized things needed to change.
Hmm.
The whole story is I wrote about in my book, Transcending Infertility, and everything that it took, all the skills that I used to come out of that. And on the other side, I realized that I was actually happier than I had ever been. And that was before we became parents. And I didn't really know why. So my analytical, sciencey mind decided to do some research into that, and I discovered that what I was experiencing is called post-traumatic growth, and just so many aspects of my life were better. A ton of aspects were better. My relationships were better. Um, my beliefs about myself, my relationship with my husband, work was better. Just everything was better. Spirituality was better. And and at that point, I began to realize that I was perfectly fine without kids. My life was beautiful. I mean, from the tiniest things, I still remember sitting in near the lavender bushes in my backyard, marveling at the bees flying around them. It was like
Hmm.
such a that level, everything became beauty. And so I had a talk with my husband and we decided to live child free. I was planning on, having 10 dogs and having a large property. And then a couple of weeks later, he said, you know what? No, I really need to be a dad. And because I was such in a Zen space, I was like, okay, cool. Let's move into the next thing, which happened to be adoption. And we are now the parents of two little boys, not little anymore. One's 12 and the other's 9, um, both born in South Korea. And that is how we came to be parents. But I do feel like I resolved my fertility issues prior to becoming a mom, if that makes any sense. I felt just completely serene and happy even before we adopted our first son.
Mm.
So that is how I came to focus my work on fertility struggles, right? Because it's such a traumatic um, experience. And so I began wanting to support folks through the fertility journey and through miscarriage and loss and all that too. So that's my how I came to do this work in general.
What a story. What I love about that, I love when you talked about the curiosity that you had and how you were kind of observing yourself and the
Yeah,
thoughts you were having, and then concerned that you weren't worried about those thoughts, and the
yeah,
research that you did, and where it led you to, and that real connection with your life, despite the fact that it wasn't going to plan, it wasn't the way you believed it would be. But yeah, you're
right.
right, that real kind of breaking open, like
Yeah,
true breaking open, like to really discover what is at the center of us, as opposed to what we
right.
believed we were, I guess, and what we believed our identity was.
That's right. That's right. Or the way that things are, quote, supposed to go, right? Like,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, amazing. And how I'm curious then afterwards, as I'm also an adopted mum, we had
Ah,
one child that we conceived and then we adopted afterwards as well. And very,
yay.
very consciously chose to adopt. You know, we didn't have IVF and we didn't go down any kind of really invasive route. We just thought this is taking longer. Let's stop. Let's switch to adoption. And it just felt right to us. And we had a lot of questions, especially from our adoption social worker, would say,
Mm,
I don't understand. You haven't done IVF and you just moved to adoption. Like, I've never met
mm,
anybody before. And she was
mm.
also a fertility counselor. And so we explained, that it just felt right for us. And we made
Yes.
that very conscious decision to move to adoption. So how was it for you then to make that decision? Like, we will have children now and we're going to adopt. How did that path go?
Well, at that point, the story is different for my husband than it is for me. He just always wanted to be a dad.
Mm,
Um, but at that point, for me, I was truly just, I'll tell you, the biggest skill that I just shout from the rooftops is meditation. I know that sounds sort of, I don't know, cookie cutter at this point. It wasn't back then. It was, years ago, 15 years ago, it was a new, new age hippie thing. But I began meditating because I was desperate. to feel okay again. And I wanted everything else didn't work, and I wanted to prove it wrong. I wanted to prove meditation couldn't work for me. I did all
You
this
know,
research and I'm
that
like, this is bogus.
that is exactly how I discovered, well, how I tried EFT. I didn't
Oh,
believe EFT would work. And I was actually getting really angry with everyone that kept telling me that I should
yeah,
just tap on points on my face and I would
yeah.
suddenly be free of all my lifelong phobias. And I thought that is ridiculous. So yeah, the surprising thing happens, doesn't it, when you go in with that
Yes,
attitude? Yeah.
it does. It does. And so the result was that I was just pleased with my life as it was, no matter how it was. And so when my husband came to me and said, I actually want to switch gears and start, trying to adopt, I was great. I was like, great. I just had so much resilience and I was able to shift and move and be fluid like water, just move with the flow of the river. And so I was fine. Whatever he wanted to move forward with, I was fine. And I was passionate about it. I was passionate about life exactly how it was.
Fantastic. Yeah, I got that kind of feeling from you when I could feel the contrast between the two halves of your journey and
Yeah.
how that changed completely.
Yeah.
Amazing. So then, was it after that whole experience that you moved into working with people with their own fertility issues?
Yeah, it was after, because just ethically, one should not work with folks after or during their own fertility journey, because it's a little too um, you can't be as objective. So
Mm.
I, was a parent of my adoptive kiddo. I just call him my son, obviously. It's now a parent. And so I felt completely resolved and happy. And then I was able to start working with folks in the fertility slash adoption world. Yeah.
Yeah, and how did you step into that? What techniques and modalities did you use?
Well, I was already a therapist. I was already a
Yeah.
mental health therapist. So most of the work that I found helpful was truthfully just having the language of fertility, right? Like all these acronyms, all these knowing the fertility organs work, just having this language and being a soft place to land for folks who
Mm.
didn't have to explain to their therapist what was going on,
That is so,
why
yeah.
fertility is such a hot point. Um,
It's so
and then,
important, isn't it? Because it's like a whole
yes,
other language, a whole
it
other
really is.
area of life that most people know nothing about. The
That's
IUIs,
right.
the IVFs, the ICSIs, people do not know what that stands for. And once you're in that world and you're going to seek support from someone, you want them to meet you at the same place, don't you? I've heard from people before saying, I had to explain everything to my therapist
That's
and
right.
it was really hard work and I didn't want to go through it all again. And so, yeah, I think that just that knowledge
That's
part
right.
is so important.
That's right. And I personally had a therapist who said to me, "Wow, that's so sad. I just look at my wife and she gets pregnant."
Oh,
And I
helpful.
said,
Mm.
"You're fired." Right. So to be that therapist who just knows the language
Yeah,
and knows how hard it is without
knows what
words.
not to say. And yeah,
Mhm.
exactly. Meets you where you are. Yeah. So you worked as a therapist and I'm sure gave, wonderful support to the fertility community. But I know things have shifted for you over time that we've been talking about. So yeah,
Yeah.
how has your work evolved over those years?
Well, I intended to just continue doing therapy for, until retirement. And then something happened. I was doing therapy with somebody. This is now about 10 years ago. Um, I was working with somebody who had tragically lost her twins at, oh gosh, 22 weeks gestation, something like this, somewhere in the 20s, late
Mm.
gestation. And we were working with, I was just doing traditional psychotherapy, and we were working on grief. And all of a sudden, I had an awareness that the souls of those babies were in the room. They were present. They were, I would say, in my head, but they were kind of floating outside and I was aware of them, and they were talking to me and poking at me and prodding at me. You have to tell her we're here. You have to tell her we're here. So now, naturally, I'm a mental health therapist. I think I'm delusional. I'm
Mhm.
hallucinating. I'm self-diagnosing in the middle of this
Mm.
session with somebody, right? So I just completely ignore it, or I try to. They're very loud, but I'm ignoring it. Um, and I freak out after she leaves. They're still there after she leaves. I don't I didn't see her for another couple of weeks. They were present with me the entire time. They followed me
Oh, wow.
home. They were in my car. They were messing with my I was listening to podcast actually back then. I was listening to a podcast called Flow Dreaming with Summer McStravick, and it was flipping between like episodes. It would play a few and then move to the next one. And I'm like, what is going on? I just thought it was an electronic glitch or something. I restarted it. I, turned off my car even and turned it back on, and it kept doing the same thing. And it finally landed on a part of the podcast where she says, get over yourself. So I start laughing and I'm like, okay, is this actually happening? Sarah, I'm telling you, for 2 weeks, I had this experience. And I didn't know what was going on. I've never had an experience like this before. I'm not somebody who has, since childhood, experienced talking with other beings or seeing angels or anything. So I didn't know what this was, and I became quite anxious. And it dawned on me that Sarah McStravick has a podcast where you can call into her show.
Oh,
So I did that. Said,
wow.
so she happens to be a psychic medium.
Mm.
And I called into her show and I said, what's going on here? I don't understand this experience, blah, blah, blah. Well, she said to me that the likelihood of this happening has increased because of two things. One, I began meditating years prior. And so my consciousness and my vibration has just raised so I can tap into other realms. And then she said that there was probably some history in my family of folks who could do this. And I'm like, no, that's not a thing. I've not had that. I've never talked to anybody in my family who's had that. And she said, well, ask. So my parents are divorced. They were divorced when I was 3. So I asked them separately, or tell them separately what's going on. And both of them say, oh yeah, that's, that's something in our family. Yeah. Yeah. So both sides of my
Mm.
family have folks who've had experiences like this. My mother has prophetic dreams. I didn't know any of this. And so I I began just researching, and that's my analytical brain. I want to know what's going on and how did this happen to me and why did this start happening? And I sat on that. I sat on that information for 8 years. Um and then, just like a lot of folks during COVID, having these shifts in their existence and their experiences, that's when I decided, you know what? I think that this could actually be quite helpful for people. And so I decided to get some training on how to do this kind of work intentionally.
Mm.
And I am now a spirit baby communicator, and I've been doing this for more than 2 years now, intentionally and with some training behind me now. And it has been one of the most miraculous, amazing things. I mean, I just feel that I'm not doing it. I feel that it's all just coming through me like I'm a
Mm.
vessel, and babies are able to communicate with their intended parents and vice versa. And it's been, I mean, wild. It's just been completely wild and wonderful.
Amazing. Wow. So, gosh, I'm just trying to get my head around the whole experience for you and what that
Right?
must have been like. Especially, yeah, when you don't have any background with that or understanding of it, and how terrifying that must have been in the moment and not knowing what to do with this.
That's a
So,
good word.
but yeah, knowing we already say, how you were curious and wanting to research
Yes.
things. I can imagine having the training now, and
Yeah.
having that kind of framework and guidance and yeah, show you that this is a real thing and this is, you know, what can be expected and so on. I don't know what that would have involved. I'll be fascinated to hear more about that. But yeah, it sounds like an amazing journey you've made to get to this point. So how does that look for the people you work with? Because you said that first experience were the twins that had been lost in the late
Mm-hmm.
pregnancy.
Mm-hmm.
Does that tend to be the experience, or is it babies that are yet to come in as well?
It's both. It's both. And to be clear, I in the States we have, legal, boundaries, and so I
Mm-hmm.
can't do this kind of work with psychotherapy clients.
Mm-hmm.
But I can do it obviously outside of the psychotherapeutic realm. So um I folks who come to see me are of all kinds of they just, oh gosh, how many stories can I tell? I don't divulge folks' personal information, but I do have general you know sort of narratives or illustrations around who comes to me, folks who have lost babies, who or children who have lived for a bit and then passed on, folks who have had multiple miscarriages, folks who have been trying to conceive and just haven't been successful. um, I had a gentleman come to me recently whose um, ex, he thought was pregnant and didn't know if that soul was tied to him. So there's all kinds of folks who are curious and want to know about spirit baby realm. It's
Mm-hmm.
it's so eye-opening to me as a psychotherapist, very clinically trained, like evidence-based, blah, 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 right? Like very science-minded. Um, it's so fascinating to me. And even I, after sessions, still go, did that happen? Like, is that real? Um, and I get emails back from folks who've had sessions with me that they're like, that thing that didn't make sense in the session, it just wasn't connecting for me. Now I know. Oh my God, now it makes sense. They've figure it out after a session. Those are my favorite. I had somebody recently had a second session with me. The first session, I said, the baby is talking about this radio flyer wagon. It's red and it's got some black writing on it. And I don't know, he's very insistent about this. And they're like, I have no idea what you're talking about. And the second session, she was like, yeah, I want me to tell you about that radio flyer. My mom had actually bought the baby a radio flyer with his name on it. I'm like, written
Oh
in
my
black.
goodness.
I'm like,
Yeah.
okay. Now this makes sense. Okay.
Wow.
So it's very specific like that, very
Mm.
specific. And there are some folks who expect these generalizations and things. No, it can be extremely specific. Um, one one person, I said, the baby is showing me a a bird that just keeps following you around, like a single bird that's just right there staring at you. And she said, "Oh my God." She said, "That happens every day when I come home from work. When I
Mm.
drive up to the driveway, there's that bird just standing there staring at me." And it's very specific.
Amazing. Now I'm imagining myself in the shoes of the people you're working with now and how that feels to them. Um, yeah, tell me a bit about what the experience is like for them and what makes them kind of feel
Yeah.
drawn to it in the first place. When do they seek this out?
Yeah, I think there's a variety of folks who are drawn to this. Um, Probably the most prominent are folks that are already quite spiritually minded. They're just open to this work. They've always been curious about it. They're open to it. They've had family experiences of this, or it's just been a regular conversation in their lives. Other folks are like me, where I'm just desperate. I'm desperate to know. I don't know what's going on. I've tried everything else. I need to know. Maybe this is the thing. I don't know. Um, so it's a variety of folks. I think probably the biggest shifts when people come to see me are for those who have had losses, because probably the largest self-talk that folks have when they have a miscarriage or even abortion is that I did something wrong. I made a mistake. I made a poor choice. I
Mm.
am, I feel so much guilt. And um, spirit babies just don't react that way. maybe once in a while. I mean, it's so rare. I did talk to the person that I trained with, and she's had some babies have some rather intense feelings about it, but I have not yet. Not that it's impossible, but most of the messages that come through, I mean, 99% of the time, it's like, no, this is perfect. This is exactly how it needed to be. Um, you did nothing wrong. Here's why. Here's why this had to happen. And I think that that is probably the biggest um I hesitate to say healing because
Mm.
it's not a healing modality, but it creates so much change
Yeah.
for folks within.
Well, it sounds like it's completing the circle there, because it is the question, isn't it? When someone loses a baby at whatever stage that's at, there is that question: why did this happen? And did I do
Yes,
anything wrong? And if only I could go back and change certain things that they presume is what they did wrong. And it doesn't
exactly.
matter how much their doctor says to them or anyone else, this just happened. It's just one of those things. It's really hard to believe that, but I can imagine hearing that really, really intense message. My goodness, you couldn't get more direct, could you?
Right.
So yeah, that could be it. Just create so much peace, I can imagine, just completion.
That's it. Yes, it creates some peace,
Mm.
finally, which of course we know from a physical perspective improves the status of the body so much, right?
Mm-hmm.
Just it improves fertility directly. Um, brings back parasympathetic nervous system, settles the body and improves the workings of the fertility system, right? Like
Yeah, yeah,
um so yeah, that's just on a physical
yeah,
level, but
yeah.
certainly the spiritual piece is huge for folks.
And we can't separate the two, can we? The spiritual,
Nope,
the emotional, the physical, they are all
I
interlinked.
don't. Yep.
Exactly. I think the world is gradually, opening up to that knowledge. But yeah,
So too.
it's clear.
Yeah,
And we forget that fertility also is, on the physical side, it's just a part of health. It's just a part of a body functioning healthily.
that's right.
So we already recognize, that stress and whatever impacts on digestion and all other parts of our body. But why not infertility? It just
Why
blows my
not?
mind that people would think there's not a link. So
Right.
yeah, I can imagine how useful and supportive and calming that is. Is there
Hmm.
any caution to be had around here, though? I mean, you mentioned there that people can feel quite desperate and looking for answers and looking for
Yes.
something.
Yes.
Is there any caution that people need to be aware of when they're
Right.
connecting this way?
That's an excellent question. First, what I recommend when folks look at work like this is to be a healthy skeptic. Now, what does that mean? I have a whole podcast episode on that. If you want to look at it. To me, being a healthy skeptic is the curiosity. Um, a skeptic to me is one who like crosses their arms, like you're going to need to prove this to me. And on the complete opposite is I believe everything that you tell me.
Yeah.
So I ask folks to come in with a healthy skeptic attitude, and that means being open to what's being said, but do not buy everything that is being said. If any psychic or psychic medium says they are 100% accurate, run away screaming. Like
Mhm.
that can't be true. I have not found that to be true. Um, but come in with an openness, come in with an open-hearted state, um, but without needing to grasp onto or buy everything that somebody is saying. And so that means really, and this is very hard in the fertility world, this means really trusting yourself. It's very difficult to do so after you've been through everything, through trauma after trauma after trauma in the fertility world. It's really hard to trust that your body is sending you the right signals, that your intuition is on point. And so I help guide through that when we are in a session. I make sure that that's in the forefront. We talk about tapping into how that feels. What does that feel like to you to hear that right now? Because it's important. I want to empower folks. Also, the other thing is that when folks do a spirit baby session, I think that it is important to recognize that you don't have to have, training, or you don't even have to have psychic mediums in your family, or coded in your DNA. I don't believe that. I actually believe that we all have this ability, that we are all intuitive beings. Some folks, just like, if I were to sit down at a piano versus somebody else, they would be a far better player than I would. But I could plunk out a few tunes, right? Like, we all have different levels, but I feel it's important for folks to learn to begin to tap into their own intuition. And so I like to leave folks with a way that they can connect on their own without somebody else. It's a way to flex and work that muscle to really trust what you're getting is
Mm.
accurate.
I love that.
So,
Yeah.
yeah.
When you first mentioned about the training that you taken part in, after your own
Mm-hmm.
experience, the question that was at the back of my mind was, does everyone need to have an experience to have that training? Or
Nope.
do people go along and just, they're curious about it and it can then awaken that side?
Yes.
So amazing.
Yes.
Yeah. Wow. So quite an experience. And I love that you're making that kind of a joint experience with them. You're sharing kind of responsibility for it, as well. It's, sounds very
Yeah.
grounded way of approaching this. Very.
That's a good way to put it. Yes.
Mm,
I think it's important, right? To have groundedness and connection to other realms.
yeah.
It's a well-balanced way of being. Yeah.
Yeah, I think for any human interactions, you need that. You mentioned that you want them to feel like, have an open mind and not just be cross-armed and nothing, not at all open, but have that openness and that trust, but also that you need to trust yourself.
Right.
It's funny, this is completely unrelated, but it took me back to a training that I did. I used to work for a bank, popular bank in the UK, in the sales department. Very different to what I do now. But they talked to us about human interaction and how we needed to detect how a customer was, because it wasn't okay to make a sale to someone if they were vulnerable in any way, for example.
Mm.
And they had this quadrant, if you can imagine it, with 4 spaces, and one side said, I'm okay, I'm not okay, and they're okay, and they're not okay. And it was all about the kind of power that can exist in that interaction. And it just
Mm.
reminded me of it there, because if we're feeling confident in what we're doing and they're just kind of you know adoring us and
Yes. Right.
and they're
Right.
not feeling okay about themselves, but they're kind of projecting it onto us and expecting
Right.
us to have the solutions, then
Right.
that's not a healthy place to start from.
Correct.
They need to feel that they have that discernment within them, don't they, and trust themselves as well as being
That's
open to trusting you. So
That is right.
yeah,
Yes, that
yeah,
is my ultimate goal, is to empower folks.
yeah.
Right.
So yeah, that training always reminds me, and it reminds me that banks can be ethical.
I know. I'm
We
actually
only hear
quite
bad stuff, don't we, sometimes?
warmed
But
by that.
yeah, it was a long time ago, but yeah, it always stayed with me because it was about the human experience, and so much of that is missing in life. And I think it's
Yes.
really important that we acknowledge that and respect each other. So
Right.
wow, we could carry on talking
We
forever,
could.
Maria.
Yes. Yes.
There is so much to cover here, but I really loved hearing about your story. So thank you so much for sharing that at the beginning, and a
Absolutely.
taster into what your work involves now. It's really beautiful. What I would love to do is to give our listeners ways that they can get in touch with you and find out more about your work. So what is the best way to do that?
Absolutely. Probably the best way is on my website, drmariarothenburger.com. And if you're interested in spirit baby stuff, you just scroll down a bit and there's a free gift there, how to start connecting on your own right now. Um, just scroll
And you
down right there on the first page of my website. Yeah.
Brilliant. And you mentioned your book as well. Was that Transcending Infertility?
Yes. Yes. Thank you.
Fantastic.
Yeah. Transcendinginfertilitybook.com. Um, and you can find that on Amazon. And probably another one would be my podcast, which is the
Of
Miracles Happen
course.
Fertility podcast. Yeah.
Yeah, amazing. We'll make sure we put all of the links on the show notes on our main
Thanks,
page,
Sarah.
and hope that everyone can get in touch with you easily. Oh, thank you so much for joining me, Maria. It's an absolute pleasure to finally swap sides, but still
I
just have an
know. Thanks
amazing
so much.
conversation.
Yes. Let's do it again.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Sarah.
I'm so pleased you're listening to the Fertile Mindset podcast, and now I would love to invite you to join us in the Fertile Mindset Sanctuary. The Sanctuary is my fertility support membership, which is focused on taking care of you and helping you enjoy your life while you wait for your baby. In the Sanctuary, I'll guide you through using an amazing technique called EFT or tapping, and you'll soon be feeling less stressed and more joyful. If you're not already in the Sanctuary, do come and join us today, because the best time to start receiving support on your fertility journey is always right now. Honestly, it makes such a difference to have good quality emotional support and techniques that you can pick up and use yourself whenever you need them. Go to fertilemindset.com/sanctuary to join us today. I look forward to hopefully seeing you there and at the next episode of the Fertile Mindset podcast.